The colony of Cell 49 was dying, and everyone knew it. The brilliant, once thriving human settlement had flourished for centuries, nestled in the orbit of a star that now pulsed with deadly radiation. But no matter how many times the colony's scientists ran the simulations, no matter how many new systems they patched together, the inevitable was upon them. Cell 49 was collapsing in on itself, and soon its energy would consume the planet surrounding it, just as it had consumed the once stable sun. Alara Tanis could feel the tension thickening the air. Every corner of the colony was a hive of frantic activity as the population scrambled to prepare for the impending disaster. Some made preparations to flee, others stood in denial, clinging to false hope. But Alara couldn't afford the luxury of fear. She had always been a problem solver, a fixer, someone who thrived when there was a problem to be solved. But this was beyond anything she had ever faced. In the dusty depths of the colony's archives, hidden away for centuries, Alara stumbled upon a discovery that made her heart race. An ancient blueprint, forgotten, overlooked, and perhaps abandoned for a reason. It depicted an artifact, a phantom gate. It was described only in fragments, as though whoever had documented it had feared the consequences of revealing too much. The document was old, the paper worn, and yet it contained a glimmer of hope. The gate was a dimensional portal, a device capable of opening doorways to other worlds. But the blueprint was incomplete. There was no guarantee it could work, and worse, there were no records of it ever having been tested. Alara was not one to shy away from the unknown. As a child, she'd been fascinated by stories of the early space explorers who defied the impossible and brought humanity to the stars. She'd always thought, if they could do it, why can't we? And now, as she stared at the faded blueprint, she felt that same spark of optimism ignite deep inside her. Her first step was to gather a team. She couldn't do this alone. The Phantom Gate was no ordinary technology. It was ancient, dangerous, and, if it worked, could be their salvation. She knew she had to act fast before the colony's leadership dismissed her idea as another fool's errand. The looming supernova wasn't waiting for anyone. She found the first willing recruit in Dr. Lyle Kincaid, a brilliant yet eccentric physicist who had spent most of his career theorizing about parallel dimensions. If anyone could make sense of the gate's cryptic design, it was him. "Are you telling me this gate could actually take us somewhere else?" Kincaid asked, his voice shaky with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "I think it can," Alara replied, voice steady, "but we won't know until we try." They met resistance from the Colony Council, who saw the gate as nothing more than a relic, a myth. The idea of pinning their survival on an untested artifact was too risky, even for a species that had survived through ingenuity and adaptation. But when the announcement came that Cell 49's core had entered its final phase of collapse, even the Council had no choice but to agree to the plan. The countdown had begun, and Alara couldn't afford to waste any more time. With Kincaid by her side, she began gathering the necessary materials to build the gate. But as they worked late into the night, something gnawed at her, a deep, unsettling feeling that there was something more to the Phantom Gate than just a way out. Something dark, hidden, and waiting for them on the other side. And someone was watching her. Alara barely slept in the days following her discovery of the Phantom Gate. The weight of the task ahead of her pressed down with suffocating force. She had gathered a ragtag team, all specialists in their fields, engineers, physicists, and even military officers, people who would help her piece together the mystery of the ancient device. The final activation would be their only chance for survival, assuming she could even manage to build the gate in time. But as the colony's final hours dwindled away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just racing against the clock. She was racing against something darker. Late one evening, after a grueling round of testing and calibrations, Alara gathered her team in the workshop. They were finally getting close, the prototype humming with barely contained energy. Kincaid was hunched over a set of scanners, his eyes flicking nervously from one display to another. His usual confidence had eroded in the face of such an unprecedented challenge. "Elara," Kincaid muttered, still studying the data. "The power fluctuations are alarming. This thing, if it activates fully, I can't guarantee we'll survive the process, and I'm still not sure where it'll even send us." "We don't have a choice," Elara replied firmly. "The star is already on the verge of going supernova. We either try this and get somewhere, or we stay and die with the rest of the colony." Just then, a voice from the doorway interrupted her thoughts. "Or we do nothing and die slowly, hoping for a miracle," said Captain Alden Riggs, his silhouette framed in the dim light of the workshop. Elara froze, her heart sinking at the sight of him. Riggs, the once respected leader of the colony's military forces, now a man with a fractured reputation. His presence was unsettling. "What are you doing here?" Elara demanded, her voice sharp. Riggs stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "I came to see what you're really up to, Tanis. You think you can save us with some ancient relic?" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You've got the entire colony in a panic. Some of us don't think it's worth the risk." Elara didn't back down. "You were one of the first to propose evacuation plans, Captain. What's your point?" Riggs's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile. "The point is, Tanis, some of us are starting to wonder if you're playing everyone for fools. Maybe this gate isn't what you think it is." He stepped closer, his tone low. "If you don't succeed, you're condemning us all. If you do succeed, who knows what you'll bring back? We're gambling everything on an unproven piece of technology, and I'm not sure I trust you to be the one pulling the lever." His words landed like a punch. Elara met his gaze, feeling a flicker of doubt, but quickly pushed it aside. She had no time for second-guessing. "I'm not playing anyone, Riggs. I'm trying to save us," she replied, her voice steady. Riggs seemed to measure her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fine, but if you fail, don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to leave but stopped at the door. "And if you succeed, well, let's hope you're right. You're not just dealing with a malfunctioning device. You're dealing with something far older, far more dangerous, something none of us truly understand." Elara swallowed the rising knot in her throat as Riggs disappeared into the dark corridors of the colony. He was right about one thing: they didn't understand the Phantom Gate. No one did, but they were running out of options. As the workshop doors hissed shut, Elara turned back to Kincaid, who was already reconfiguring the power grids. "He's not wrong," Kincaid muttered without looking up. "This is a gamble, but we have no choice now." Suddenly, an alarm blared through the colony's comm system, sending a shockwave of panic through the air. "Emergency override," came the announcement, crackling over the intercom. "All systems, code red, core instability detected." The countdown had begun. They had no more time. As Elara and Kincaid exchanged a brief, silent glance, the weight of their situation settled in. Riggs wasn't the only one who doubted them. They were all gambling with lives, his, hers, and everyone's. And someone somewhere didn't want them to succeed. The Phantom Gate hummed to life, its shimmering portal swirling in front of them, like a doorway carved into the fabric of space itself. But as the device powered up, Elara's pulse quickened, her every instinct screaming at her that something was wrong. The air felt charged, crackling with an energy too ancient to comprehend. The gate's form was solidifying, shifting from an abstract mass of light and sound into something more tangible, more real. But where would it lead? "Everything's calibrated," Kincaid muttered, his hands shaking as he adjusted the final settings. "This is it, Elara. We're opening a doorway to another world." She nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something far beyond their understanding. They had no idea where the gate would take them, whether it would be a new home or a graveyard. Riggs, who had reluctantly agreed to assist in the activation, was standing off to the side, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken much since their confrontation, but the tension between them was palpable. Despite everything, he had his doubts. Doubts that had only grown since his ominous warning about the dangers of the gate. Yet here he was still part of the team. "Are we sure about this?" Riggs asked quietly, his voice laced with something darker than concern. "Once we go through, there's no coming back. And I'm not just talking about the gate itself. Whatever's out there, what if it's worse than what we're leaving behind?" Elara turned toward him, meeting his eyes with a resolve that surprised even herself. "We either make it through that gate, or we die here. The star's core is unstable. We have minutes, hours at best. I don't know what's on the other side, but I know this is our only shot." Riggs didn't argue. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew the stakes, and there was no turning back. The portal flared with intensity, the colors swirling faster and faster, warping space around it. It was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful, and the room seemed to vibrate with the force of it. Elara stepped forward, her breath catching as the edge of the gate pulsed in response to her presence. "Here goes nothing," she said under her breath. With a swift motion, she pressed the final command into the console, initiating the sequence to fully open the gate. The moment she did, the world around them shattered. A violent force slammed into her chest, dragging her through the fabric of reality. The pressure was unbearable, like being squeezed through a tunnel of raw, electrified air. Her vision blurred as everything around her warped, distorted by the sudden dimensional shift. She felt weightless, then heavy, like her body was being pulled in all directions at once. There was no up, no down, only the feeling of falling through the very core of the universe. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. Elara hit the ground with a harsh thud. She gasped for air, her senses slowly returning as her vision cleared. Her body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. But the first thing she noticed was the sky. The sky wasn't right. It wasn't the deep, familiar blue of Cell 49's atmosphere. Instead, it was a muted grayish purple, swirling with clouds that seemed to shimmer unnaturally. The landscape before her stretched out in a vast, desolate plain, littered with the remnants of old stone structures that looked like ancient ruins, now crumbled to dust. "Where are we?" Kinkid's voice was faint as he groaned from where he lay, struggling to push himself up. Elara slowly rose to her feet, her head spinning as she took in the unfamiliar landscape. The gate had deposited them on a barren, lifeless world, and yet there was something eerily familiar about it. The ruins had a human design. But these structures, these crumbled monuments, none of them looked recent. In fact, they appeared as if they had been abandoned for millennia. A chill ran down her spine. "We're not just on another planet," Elara whispered, her mind racing. "This is a ghost colony. We found an abandoned world, and I think we're not the first ones to use the gate." As the rest of the team slowly regained their bearings and gathered around her, Elara's thoughts flashed to the Phantom Gate and the warning Riggs had given her. The gate wasn't just a means of escape. It was a door to something far older and far more dangerous than they had realized, and they had just walked through it. The question now wasn't just about survival. It was about what had happened to the people who had come here before, and whether they too were still out there, waiting. The silence of the alien world pressed down like a physical weight, suffocating and unnerving. Elara motioned for her team to follow as they cautiously moved through the ruins. The stone structures were bizarre and unfamiliar, unlike any human architecture they had encountered before. Jagged lines, sharp angles, and walls etched with cryptic symbols covered in dust. This place felt ancient, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. "We need to find shelter," Kinkid said, his voice tight with unease. "This place gives me the creeps." Elara nodded in agreement but didn't voice her own misgivings. They couldn't afford to dwell on fear. Time was not a luxury they had anymore. The gate had sent them here for a reason, and that reason whether by fate or sheer randomness, had to be discovered. As they ventured deeper into the remnants of what appeared to be a once thriving city, Alara's gaze kept darting to the darkened skies above. The eerie purple hue that bathed the world made everything feel out of place, too still, too unnatural. The clouds moved in ways they shouldn't, swirling around in tight patterns, as if the atmosphere itself was alive, watching them. "We should stick together," Alara ordered. "We don't know if anything else made it through that gate, and we don't know if it's safe out here." Riggs, who had been unusually quiet since their arrival, suddenly spoke up. His voice was low, almost contemplative. "This place, it's familiar, not in a good way." He pointed to the jagged ruins of a nearby structure. "That design, it's human." Alara's stomach churned at the thought. She had already suspected it, but hearing it out loud made it worse. This wasn't just a barren, forgotten world. It was a place where humanity had once lived, a colony, maybe even one of their own, lost, abandoned, or worse. "Look at these walls," Kincaid said, crouching beside a set of intricate carvings etched into the stone. "These symbols, they're similar to some of the earliest human languages, but they're distorted, twisted." He ran a hand over the surface, brushing away the dust. As he did, the ground under their feet trembled, sending a shockwave through the air. For a moment, Alara froze, heart pounding. "What was that?" she asked, eyes scanning the horizon. "No idea," Kincaid muttered, "but we need to be careful. Whatever this place was, it's not like anything we've encountered before." They moved deeper into the ruins, guided by instinct and the growing need for answers. The atmosphere was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional distant rumble or the creaking of ancient stone. As they walked through what appeared to be the remnants of a once grand hall, Alara's eyes caught on a large, half-buried object near the center of the room. The metal panel, half shattered, partially hidden under a pile of debris. With a deep breath, Alara approached it. Her hands were steady as she cleared away the rubble, revealing the gleaming surface of what looked like an old communication device, a relic from the past. "It's human," she said, voice almost a whisper. The device had to be ancient, but it was undeniably of human design. Riggs stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "How long has it been here?" Alara's mind raced as she ran her fingers over the worn controls. If this was here, if this had survived the ravages of time, then perhaps the stories were true. Perhaps this colony had been abandoned for a reason. A terrifying reason. The truth was beginning to unravel, and with each passing moment, Alara felt the weight of what they had stepped into, a forgotten world, a deadly past, and the chilling realization that humanity's own history was more complicated, more dangerous than they had ever known. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted again, and the wall to their left creaked open with a heavy, grinding sound. Shadows moved within, and Alara's heart skipped a beat. Whatever they had uncovered here, it wasn't going to be without consequence. Something, or someone, was watching, and it wasn't going to let them leave. The air grew heavier with each passing second. The ground had settled after the tremor, but the oppressive silence persisted, suffocating everything around them. Alara's instincts screamed at her to run, to get as far from the open door as possible, but she couldn't. Not yet. The metal panel that had shifted seemed to beckon them forward, like a gateway to some hidden chamber beneath the ruins. She could feel the weight of her team's gaze on her back as she cautiously approached the opening, her hand instinctively resting on the weapon at her hip. "Alara, don't," Riggs warned, his voice low and urgent. He was staring at the dark passageway ahead, his hand gripping the edge of the doorway like he was fighting the urge to close it. Whatever's behind that wall, it's not a welcome sight. But Alara couldn't stop herself. Her curiosity, no, her need to understand, drove her forward. She needed to know what happened here. What had happened to this colony? Why had it been abandoned? The gate had led them here for a reason, and she couldn't walk away without finding that reason. Stay close, she ordered the others, her voice steady, though she felt anything but. We're not leaving until we know what's going on. With a nod from Kincaid and a reluctant grunt from Riggs, the team entered the dark passage. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the walls began to close in around them, the space growing narrower. The air smelled stale, and every breath felt like inhaling ancient dust. The tunnel stretched on for what seemed like an eternity before they finally emerged into a vast chamber, illuminated by flickering lights embedded into the ceiling. The room was cavernous, with walls covered in strange, glowing symbols and murals depicting scenes of people, humans, though their faces were twisted, distorted, as if the artist had tried to capture something far darker than simple human likeness. The center of the room was dominated by a massive console, surrounded by intricate machinery, all of it covered in dust and cobwebs from what appeared to be centuries of disuse. Ilara stepped forward, eyes scanning the room with growing dread. This is a control center, she murmured, half to herself. The equipment, though ancient, looked too advanced for the time period of the colony. It was almost as if the colony had been built upon something older, a hidden ancient technology long forgotten. Kincaid moved to one of the panels, tapping it with his fingers. It's still functional, he said, his voice filled with awe. The power's still on. Whatever happened here, it wasn't from lack of resources. Or time, Riggs added, his eyes narrowed. This place is centuries old, but the technology, it's too sophisticated for a human colony. Ilara walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, inspecting the murals on the walls. The more she studied them, the more she was convinced of one thing. This colony hadn't been abandoned by choice. The faces in the murals, those twisted, tortured expressions, told a story she wasn't ready to comprehend. Look at this, she said, pointing to a section of the mural. The figures depicted seemed to be standing in front of a massive door, a gate, and there was something else in the image. A dark, shadowy figure standing just beyond the threshold, its presence ominous and oppressive. It was nothing like the peaceful explorers of the past. This figure was alien, something from the depths of nightmares. This is what they were running from, Ilara whispered, her blood running cold. They didn't leave because the colony failed. They were driven away by whatever was on the other side of that gate. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, and the ground beneath them trembled once again. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the chamber. And then, a mechanical voice crackled to life through the speakers, its tone cold and robotic. Unidentified intruders detected, commencing lockdown. Before anyone could react, the massive doors to the chamber slammed shut with an earth-shattering roar, sealing them inside. The walls began to shift, and the floor beneath them groaned with the sound of gears turning. Ilara's heart raced. "We've activated something," she said, her voice tight with panic. "This is no longer just about survival. We're caught in whatever this place was trying to keep hidden." The hum grew louder, and the room began to fill with a dim, red light, casting the shadows in even sharper contrast. There was no way out. And then, through the noise, they heard it, a low, guttural sound, like something breathing in the dark. Something was coming. The chamber was alive with tension, the air thick with the promise of imminent danger. The loud, echoing hum of the machinery reverberated through Ilara's bones, setting her nerves on edge. The automated voice from the speakers had faded, but the ominous red glow continued to pulse, casting everything in an unnatural light. "Where's the exit?" Kincaid demanded, his voice rising with panic. He slammed his hand against the wall, but it didn't budge. "There has to be a way out of here," Ilara said, trying to force calm into her voice. But as she scanned the room, every wall, every door, every console seemed to be part of a larger system, one that was now actively resisting them. The floor beneath their feet groaned again, shifting slightly, as if the very structure of the building was moving. Riggs took a step forward, his hand hovering over the controls on one of the consoles. We're locked in. Whatever this place is, it's making sure we don't leave. His fingers danced over the interface, but nothing responded to his commands. It was as if the system had already anticipated their intrusion and was actively thwarting their efforts to escape. A low rumble echoed from the far side of the room, followed by a heavy mechanical screech. The source of the sound was coming closer. Ilara's pulse quickened. The dark shape she had seen in the mural, was it real? Had it followed them through the gate? Move! Ilara barked, stepping away from the console. She gestured toward the far end of the room, where a set of large metal doors loomed. There's got to be another way out. Follow me. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing off the cold, hard floors. But as they neared the doors, the room seemed to shift around them. The walls retracted, revealing hidden compartments in the floor, and from those compartments, sleek, shadowy forms emerged. Humanoid figures, tall and indistinct, their shapes barely visible in the low light. Their eyes glowed faintly with an eerie, sickly green light, and as they moved closer, the air around them seemed to grow colder. What are they? Kincaid asked, voice trembling as he backed away. They're not human, Ilara muttered, instinctively reaching for her sidearm. She fired a warning shot, but the energy blast harmlessly ricocheted off one of the figures, making no impact. Riggs raised his rifle, aiming directly at the nearest figure, but before he could fire, one of the shadows moved, its hand extended in a smooth, unnatural motion. The air hummed with a strange, almost invisible force, and suddenly, Riggs's rifle was ripped from his hands, sent flying across the room and crashing into the far wall. The figures didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone filled the room with an unbearable tension, as if they were beings that existed beyond time, watching, waiting. The mechanical hum from the walls grew louder, and the floor beneath their feet shifted again, this time with purpose. Get to the doors. Ilara yelled, her voice desperate. She ran for the far wall, slamming her hand against the panel in an attempt to override the security systems. But nothing happened. The figures, now standing at the center of the room, seemed to converge on them, a suffocating presence that made Ilara's skin crawl. Suddenly, one of the figures took a step forward, its glowing eyes locking onto Ilara. It raised one long, slender arm, and for a moment, she thought it might attack. But instead, it extended its hand toward her, a gesture that could have been mistaken for an offer or a demand. Ilara, no, Kincaid shouted, grabbing her arm, pulling her back. But Ilara, her heart pounding, found herself unable to resist. Her curiosity, the same burning drive that had led her this far, pulled her toward the figure. It was as if the creature's gaze was reaching into her, trying to communicate something beyond language. I can't explain it, Ilara whispered, her voice shaking. I think it wants me to go with it. Without warning, the figure took a step closer, and in that moment, the entire room seemed to pulse with energy. The lights flickered, and the air around them crackled with static. The hum grew into an intense, high-pitched frequency that made Ilara's teeth ache. The floor beneath them rumbled once more, and suddenly, the figure's hand shot out, wrapping around Ilara's wrist with a grip that was cold, like death itself. For a moment, Ilara couldn't breathe. The world spun around her, and the shadows seemed to press in from all sides. And then, with a violent lurch, the room fell silent. The last thing Ilara saw before everything went dark was the figure's glowing eyes, too bright, too ancient, locking onto hers. And then, there was nothing. The world snapped back into focus with a jolt that made Ilara gasp. Her body felt heavy, her limbs unresponsive, as though she were suspended in a void. She tried to move, but her arms and legs wouldn't cooperate. Panic clawed at her chest, but before she could fully comprehend what was happening, a soft, mechanical hum began to vibrate around her. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her blurry vision. Gradually, shapes began to form around her, dark figures moving in the periphery. Slowly, painfully, she forced her head to turn, but her neck felt stiff and unnatural. It was as though her entire body was locked in place. The cold metal surface beneath her was hard and unyielding, and the smell of old machinery filled her nostrils. The first thing she saw was the figure from before, the tall, shadowy form that had reached out for her. It stood a few meters away, watching her with its eerie green eyes, its motionless body poised like a predator waiting for its prey to move. The others were still there too, Kincaid, Riggs, and the rest of the team. But they were silent, frozen in the same unnatural positions, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Elara's heart raced as the realization hit her like a slap. They weren't dead. They were trapped, ensnared by whatever dark force controlled this place. She attempted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a soft whisper filled her mind. The voice was distant, mechanical, like a recording, but there was something more to it. A presence that felt both alien and familiar. The voice was alive, and it was speaking directly to her thoughts. "You are not supposed to be here." The words rang out, piercing through the silence in her head. She clenched her fists, desperate to regain control of her body, but the force holding her in place was too strong. She was being forced to listen. This place, this colony, was abandoned for a reason. You have opened the door, and now you must understand. The figure moved closer, its form darkening the space around her. Elara could see now that it was not entirely humanoid. The tall, gaunt figure was wrapped in flowing, black robes, but its features were unsettling, blurred, as if it didn't belong in this reality. Its glowing eyes fixed on hers with an unnerving intensity. "The gate you used to enter, it is no simple doorway. It is an ancient device, created long before your kind walked the stars. It was never meant for you. You who do not understand the consequences of your actions." The air around Elara seemed to grow heavier, like the very atmosphere was thick with an unseen pressure. She felt herself being drawn deeper into the creature's gaze, as if it were pulling the truth from her own mind, forcing her to understand. This world, it is the last remnant of a failed experiment. The colony that once thrived here was not human. It was others, creatures from a time beyond the stars, ancient and dangerous. You are nothing more than an uninvited guest, a trespasser in a place far older than your species can fathom. Elara's mind spun as the words cut into her like a blade. A failed experiment? Creatures from beyond the stars? None of this made sense. Her chest tightened as the horrifying implications of the creature's words began to sink in. The gate is a tool of awakening, a bridge between worlds, and now you have opened it. You have awakened something that was never meant to return. A cold shiver ran down Elara's spine as she realized that the figure wasn't just speaking about the colony's fall. It was speaking about something far more terrifying. You are not alone here, child of humanity. Others have come before you, and others will come after, but you will not survive. None who have crossed the threshold of the gate have ever left. You will join the forgotten, become part of the darkness that dwells in the heart of this place. The voice in her mind twisted with a finality that made Elara's blood run cold. The shadows in the chamber seemed to grow longer, thicker, like living tendrils reaching out to consume her. And then the truth became clear. The colony, the gate, the abandoned world, they were not merely a lost civilization. They were the remnants of an ancient alien force, trapped between dimensions, waiting for someone, anyone, to open the door. And now, Elara and her crew were caught in the snare, unable to escape. The creature moved closer, its form shimmering with an unnatural, ethereal glow. "You have already been marked," it whispered in her mind. "Now your fate is sealed." A wave of nausea swept over Elara as her surroundings darkened. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the figure's eyes, glowing with an eerie, predatory light, and then an endless void, stretching out before her, swallowing her whole. The game had changed, and now they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. The world snapped back into focus with a jolt that made Alara gasp. Her body felt heavy, her limbs unresponsive, as though she were suspended in a void. She tried to move, but her arms and legs wouldn't cooperate. Panic clawed at her chest, but before she could fully comprehend what was happening, a soft, mechanical hum began to vibrate around her. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her blurry vision. Gradually, shapes began to form around her, dark figures moving in the periphery. Slowly, painfully, she forced her head to turn, but her neck felt stiff and unnatural. It was as though her entire body was locked in place. The cold metal surface beneath her was hard and unyielding, and the smell of old machinery filled her nostrils. The first thing she saw was the figure from before, the tall, shadowy form that had reached out for her. It stood a few meters away, watching her with its eerie green eyes, its motionless body poised like a predator waiting for its prey to move. The others were still there too, Kincaid, Riggs, and the rest of the team. But they were silent, frozen in the same unnatural positions, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Alara's heart raced as the realization hit her like a slap. They weren't dead. They were trapped, ensnared by whatever dark force controlled this place. She attempted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a soft whisper filled her mind. The voice was distant, mechanical, like a recording, but there was something more to it. A presence that felt both alien and familiar. The voice was alive, and it was speaking directly to her thoughts. "You are not supposed to be here." The words rang out, piercing through the silence in her head. She clenched her fists, desperate to regain control of her body, but the force holding her in place was too strong. She was being forced to listen. "This place, this colony, was abandoned for a reason. You have opened the door, and now you must understand." The figure moved closer, its form darkening the space around her. Alara could see now that it was not entirely humanoid. The tall, gaunt figure was wrapped in flowing, black robes, but its features were unsettling, blurred, as if it didn't belong in this reality. Its glowing eyes fixed on hers with an unnerving intensity. "The gate you used to enter. It is no simple doorway. It is an ancient device, created long before your kind walked the stars. It was never meant for you, you who do not understand the consequences of your actions." The air around Alara seemed to grow heavier, like the very atmosphere was thick with an unseen pressure. She felt herself being drawn deeper into the creature's gaze, as if it were pulling the truth from her own mind, forcing her to understand. This world, it is the last remnant of a failed experiment. The colony that once thrived here was not human. It was others, creatures from a time beyond the stars, ancient and dangerous. You are nothing more than an uninvited guest, a trespasser in a place far older than your species can fathom. Alara's mind spun as the words cut into her like a blade. A failed experiment? Creatures from beyond the stars? None of this made sense. Her chest tightened as the horrifying implications of the creature's words began to sink in. The gate is a tool of awakening, a bridge between worlds, and now you have opened it. You have awakened something that was never meant to return. A cold shiver ran down Alara's spine as she realized that the figure wasn't just speaking about the colony's fall, it was speaking about something far more terrifying. "You are not alone here, child of humanity. Others have come before you, and others will come after, but you will not survive. None who have crossed the threshold of the gate have ever left. You will join the forgotten, become part of the darkness that dwells in the heart of this place." The voice in her mind twisted with a finality that made Alara's blood run cold. The shadows in the chamber seemed to grow longer, thicker, like living tendrils reaching out to consume her. And then the truth became clear. The colony, the gate, the abandoned world, they were not merely a lost civilization. They were the remnants of an ancient alien force, trapped between dimensions, waiting for someone, anyone, to open the door. And now, Alara and her crew were caught in the snare, unable to escape. The creature moved closer, its form shimmering with an unnatural, ethereal glow. "You have already been marked," it whispered in her mind. "Now your fate is sealed." A wave of nausea swept over Ilara as her surroundings darkened. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the figure's eyes, glowing with an eerie, predatory light, and then an endless void, stretching out before her, swallowing her whole. The game had changed, and now they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey,